we have a blockbuster show for you today. Oh my gosh, we're going to talk about the banks, and we're going to find out once again they're parked their digital passport evil on Michael McKibben's technology, his stolen patent. And we also, the Gabriels, we also go over across the bridge, and we like to look at things that are spiritual in nature. And when you look at this combo, I asked Mike today if he would take a moment and if he would say a prayer that he no longer finds it acceptable that this demon is riding on his stolen technology, his creativity that came from within him, made in the image of God, and to tell that demon he's no longer allowed to ride that. Michael, did you do that for us?
I did.
And we hope that everyone out here listening to us will say that prayer as well. Okay, let's get started. We got a Mike and Doug show. What did you find, boys?
Tell them about the fraud and that
Hey,
fancy
Douglas,
phrase.
did you print out that patent information? I need to stop here and go get it. I forgot.
Okay, well, Mike can go, but where this really happened for me is I did see DeSantis come out and push back on the CBDC in Florida, and also Ted Cruz did the same thing. So very excitedly with Douglas this morning, I said, "Oh, did you see that?" And he said, "Not going to matter. They're just doing that for political standing, but what they're doing is not going to work." Can you address that briefly until Mike gets back?
Well, as Michael always points out, fraud vitiates every contract. So if there was fraud involved, this is one of the last angles we might have to leverage this situation. But if we get into what I've just discovered in the last 2 days, it's going to be a little bit depressing for you. And we just have to remember that we must resist. We must resist. Resist.
But you said that what they are doing at the state level is not going to be effective because the feds are already going to roll this out. In fact, what you said was, excuse me, taking a breath here, is that we have lost America totally and completely to this thing called the Fed, which we know to be the synagogue of Satan.
Yes. The U.S. Federal Reserve is not U.S., it's not federal, and it has no reserves. But now they have become, since 2021, 10,000 federal agencies and private corporations, as well as all the MasterCard, Visa, Discover, all of them have all sold out to the Fed, and they're going to become the biggest bank in the world. And unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it. And when pinhead DeSantis, just look at his head. He can't have good thoughts.
I know we're opposed to him at many levels, but when I heard him come out and say this, I went, well, is he doing this for political points?
Yes, he is, because he knows that all it takes is a vote in the House of Representatives, and U.S. Treasury digital currency will simply become legal tender. That will take one vote, and these are the same people who voted to give our sovereignty away during the pandemic. These are the same people who allowed this to happen and have allowed and continued their association with the U.S. Federal Reserve, which is, of course, criminal, fraudulent, and is a private corporation owned by the same exact asset managers and bankers that we know are taking over everything and have taken over it. BlackRock itself is now in control of our debt. There are risk management and our debt management. Well, who is that? That is BlackRock working for the U.S. Fed. Unfortunately, Biden's deal called the bank term funding is all out of the U.S. Fed. The situation is that since 2021, the Fed line has been it's the biggest bank already, and it will just become much, much bigger. And now they have Fed Now, which is going to be another step, basically to take what they have found with the errors that they started in 2021 and make it so that it is absolutely foolproof. And by the way, the group that is handling their accounting, their supposed digital ledger system called blockchain, which Michael invented, by the way, the company is Tessert, Tessert. They've already been proven to be fraudulent, inadequate, and they were the ones doing the accounting for Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and First Republic. If
Oh,
that doesn't tell
surprise.
you something, yeah, what a surprise, Michael says. What a surprise. So when they tell you blockchain is going to be the perfect solution to never having another dime stolen from your account, that is a lie because they've already proven it isn't so. But
Well, then,
Michael has
well,
found
then he emails me because he and the miners are down there and they're pulling up these patents. Michael, what did you find?
Yeah, one of our miners emailed me this morning, so we dropped everything and took a look at it. And it is a patent issued on January 10th of 2023. The name of the patent is Digital Passport with Verified Data Provenance. And the applicant is the Bank of America Corporation, and they're also the assignee. And we start looking at the details of this patent application. One of the references in this patent application is to what is loosely called prior art, but in this case, it's a document published by the World Economic Forum on traveler digital identity. So what we're seeing here is that the Bank of America and these patent holders, or these patentees, inventors, I should say, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 inventors, all Americans listed here. And if you combined their current employers and their interlocked previous employers, we're looking at Bank of America, Facebook, IBM, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Norsk Data out of Norway, City of London University, Capital One, Genworth, SAP, Accenture, and the World Economic Forum. And this is all flying under the flag of Bank of America. And what is so evident in reading this patent, that the World Economic Forum used the Bank of America as a shill to file this patent and got these inventors to put their name on it, and they certified it, which is going to be critical to what I'm going to say in a minute. And what they're doing is they're describing how the World Economic Forum is going to implement their digital identity program for traveling, which would include preventing people from traveling if they don't match any particular item in this database. But they call this database blockchain. And as I've said many times in numbers of shows, blockchain is nothing more than a digital social profile where the data is distributed in a number of different places, which was the way we invented it. And in the case of blockchain for this global database that the World Economic Forum, this isn't Bank of America, this is the World Economic Forum, is trying to implement. What they're doing is they're describing blockchain in two pieces. One is, if you're traveling, Douglas, let's say you leave your home and you travel to the other part of the world. Well, this one world government database, this travel identity, needs to travel with you. And so one of the ways that they've determined to do that is to take your social profile and make a copy of it on the other side of the world. And the reason you have to do that is because if all people's identities all over the world are having to go back to a single location where all of your data is stored, that will consume too many resources in the internet and it won't work. So what they did is they took our invention of social networking, and what they've done is they've added a layer which they've determined to call blockchain, but in fact is just a duplicate of your profile and a duplicate of the data references in your profile that they'll stick on the other side of the world. So as you add new transactions to that particular database, which is collecting data on the other side of the world, it'll all reference back to your core profile, and that's what they call blockchain. It is nothing more than a way to distribute the storage of data so that it all rolls up into your one profile. It's a hierarchical relationship. That's it. It's nothing magic. It's just the way to do it. It's the way we invented it. And so what they're doing here is actually described blockchain. So this patent itself is fraudulent because they did not acknowledge our patent as prior art in defining what they are claiming. And they're not claiming anything that already doesn't exist. But the bigger fraud here's the big fraud. These inventors, they're subject to something called equitable conduct, i.e., they pledge that they're not lying about what they're doing and the work they've done in submitting this patent. And there's 5 people on it. And as we now know, these corrupt individuals all run in packs, like a wolf, like a set of wolves. Well, not a set of wolves. What's a group of wolves?
A pack.
A pack of wolves. Okay, so we looked up their patent office wrapper for this particular patent, and sure enough, we see certifications and oaths that all these patent inventors have pledged to the patent office. We have their signatures, and I believe Tyler has published this already. And each one of these guys said they're not lying and that they receive compensation from Bank of America as employees or other forms of payment, which is very vague, in exchange for assigning their rights to the assignee, which in this case is Bank of America Corporation. Now, what these guys have done is that they have lied to the patent office, in my opinion. And therefore, everything about this patent is fraudulent. And wouldn't it be interesting in all this push to push this digital identity, digital passport on everyone on the planet, the whole plan could be undone because of these 5 inventors who committed fraud, and we have their signatures already. We already have evidence to prove that they're fraudulent.
I see this as the tattoo they put upon the people who went into the concentration camps in Germany. And who was it that kept track of those people? IBM. Who was it that stole?
IBM's on this list, by the way.
And of course, IBM Eclipse Foundation stole the very inventions that you are talking about here. So to me, this is fait accompli. This is also going to include your vaccinations, and it will be linked because we already know this. We've seen it happen in Britain. We've seen it happen in France and many other countries, that they've moved forward not only with an ID, a digital ID for health, supposedly health, pharmaceutical control, I would call it, but now they're going to put the money next to it. So basically, I predict, and we already see this happening in Britain, you won't be able to get your money if you're not fully vaccinated with the most current vaccinations eventually. But I hope that what you're pointing out can be used as legal leverage to stop this in its tracks now.
Oh, it most certainly can. I just exposed enough judicially recognizable evidence. There's no additional need to validate it. These guys have signed and put their signatures in the patent office, and those are available, that they did not lie. And then yet what we see in the patent is they lied through their teeth, because all they did was take their orders from the World Economic Forum, which they referenced in the patent, and then implemented that technology through their various corporations. Now, let me read you one paragraph. In a patent, one of the things you have to do is state the problem that you're solving. And it's called the background of the invention, and anybody can look this up. And let me read you this, and I'm going to try to do it with a straight face. Traveling may expose a traveler to hazards. Being exposed to hazards may present a danger to the traveler. Being exposed to the hazards may present a danger to other parties aside from the traveler. The traveler and the other parties may be unaware of the exposure. The traveler and the other parties may be unaware of the danger presented by the exposure. That's the problem.
This is economic lockdown. It's
oh my
very
gosh.
clear what's going on. But I'm just hoping that the fact that it's fraudulent from the beginning might be able to stop it before it gets too far along.
Yeah.
And
yes,
that's the problem.
Anybody that does patent litigation would know what I'm saying here, that these guys, we have enough evidence here of a possible fraud to file a lawsuit right now. And if patent attorney, in fact, a district court judge has enough information here to act sua sponte, which means act on his or her own behalf, and actually file to have this patent adjudicated as to whether it's fraudulent or not, based on just what we know now from the face of the patent. So we need some of judges to stop sitting on their butts and start acting sua sponte to save our Constitution, which they have pledged to do.
And the digital ID, we already know from previous research in the last 2.5 years that if you have a new phone that's only 2 years old, it's already on the phone. It just hasn't been activated that they can track your vaccinations, they can track your health records, they can track everything. But now it's going to become the Chinese social credit system invented by Eric Schmidt called Dragonfly. And it's already been incorporated in America. We already have social credit numbers coming up in all different forms everywhere you look, whether it's with banking, whether it's with medical conditions or concerns, whether it's vaccinations. It's already in place. And this is the part that just is disturbing. Now, there is some rumors that, people like Pinhead DeSantis says he's not going to allow U.S. digital currency in Florida. Well, all it takes is a vote of the Congress, vote of the House of Representatives, and it will become legal tender. So that's just political maneuvering.
If he is not going to, sorry to interrupt you, but if he is not going to ban Facebook and every other social media platform, including Truth Social, and Rumble and everyone else, if he's not going to ban all those also, then he's already allowed this. That's kabuki theater.
Okay, but he's an attorney. He's a JAG, right? Yale,
Yes.
Harvard, real smart guy, right? So if he could take your information as an attorney and do something proper with it and truly end it.
He could.
For everybody. So
he could file a case based on this.
And take care of all 50 states instead of trying to trick us in his one state.
Right. Exactly. He can't do that with anything related to patents. He can't.
Another person who's come out, and I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, but the other person who's come out against this and is doing something about is Ted Cruz. And the first thing I think of is, oh yeah, Mr. Heidi Cruz, Goldman Sachs. Yeah, like they're really going to rush in and try to save us.
Goldman Sachs is on this list. One of the inventors worked for Goldman Sachs.
Essentially, this is taking away your unalienable rights of your own sovereignty for your life. But what do we have as unalienable rights? We have the right to, we don't have the right to property. And this basically makes sure that you don't have the right to own any property because you can be taxed and taken away from you if you don't. So our unalienable rights have already been taken away from us. And who is it that's doing this? Well, it's about 110 years since 1913 when the U.S. Federal Reserve went into place. And that was to make sure that the banks were all controlled. But this is so insidious, it wants to control every person's relationship to a bank. Now, people could argue that digital ID for banking or for economic purposes, well, that's okay. I don't have a bank. I don't need one. Incorrect. It will be everything there. Your entire profile will be there. And the nonsense that it needs to be international for international travel, what about people who don't internationally travel? Doesn't matter. It's the Bank for International Settlement that controls all of the clearing for any central bank in any nation. So this is all tied together, and it's all tied together with the pharmaceutical World War III. It's all tied together with the economic slavery of America, and who owns that? That would be private bankers are doing this for their own sake. And why? Because they own the U.S. Federal Reserve, and they hide it behind banks, which are basically British instigated banks, as well as asset management companies like BlackRock. Remember, BlackRock is now in control of our debt management. In other words, they're in control of what happens with the $25 trillion debt we have to the U.S. Federal Reserve, which again is not a government agency. It is a private corporation. And remember, private corporations are not culpable. All they have to do, if this fraud is found out or the giant plan is found out, is fire the person at the top and forget about it. We see it all the time.
Right.
Corporations are not liable for these things. And so they're instead of going behind the US Treasury digital currency? Incorrect. It is going to be the US Federal Reserve digital currency, period. As far as I'm concerned, this is the overthrow of the US Treasury, the last vestiges that we have. And we've just seen this in the banking crisis that happens. Perhaps we'll pick up that topic here in a minute. But the point is that you can be assessed right now. You don't have to even have a digital ID for vaccinations. They can simply use a phone, use an app, and determine how much graphene oxide, reduced graphene oxide, is in your body. If there's not enough, you didn't get the shots. And so literally, it doesn't even matter whether we have this, but now that it's become the device that will give you existence in the economic world and no longer controlled by the United States Treasury, if you don't have this ID passport, international, by the way, anything international, I don't agree with. Transnationalism, globalism, no, wrong. It should be illegal to give our power away like this. And so if we look closely at who owns the ones in Britain that are already in place, where we already see in other countries, people go to get money out of the bank and they can't because they haven't got their booster shot. This is happening all over England, and they're locking them down into 20-minute areas where they either have to walk or ride a bike, and they can't go beyond that. And so they're basically taking all the assets in the world, putting them into the central banks, which is controlled by a bank in Switzerland, which has, again, the stolen gold from Germany and from Japan, the Yamashita gold.
And
they have all that gold.
Solomon's gold.
And Solomon's gold. And so what's going to happen here is the reset of the World Economic Forum is a reset for the billionaires. It's not a reset for us. It's an imprisonment. They might as well tattoo our new digital ID on our forehead, but instead of sending us to concentration camps, they have us locked down so we can't even get the food that we need. We won't even be able to go to the places that we want to go. And it's the social credit system of China.
I think I hope more and more people are beginning to realize that system is coming upon us. Just one local, that there are certain restaurants that you can't go in and use cash. If you don't use a credit card, you can't eat. Now that's a small example, but that's going to grow.
All the credit card companies have already sold out to the U.S. Federal Reserve through a thing called Fed Line. And now, as of 2023, it's going to be upgraded to Fed Now. If you look at Fed Line, that means that those people already have their ID number. And that means all the large banks, all the credit card companies, 10,000 institutions have already signed up for this. And by the way, it was an executive order that made every federal agency, all 56 of them, have to have the compatibility with this system, which will now be called Fed Now, but previously for the last 2 years has been called Fed Line. And it has capacities that you can't even imagine. Let me just read you a couple of them.
But and let me say, at the end of this, I'm going to tell you why this system ain't going to work.
I believe it won't work either. I believe it will fail, but then we could be in a mess that people can't even comprehend. Yes. Yeah, it could be horrible. So they have Fed ACH, which is file processing. So they're going to control all information having to do with stock markets, banking, all your credit cards. They will know every single penny you're spending. That's what that means. So I'm going to interpret what these things are. Fed ACH, which of course they don't tell you what that is. That's going to be your dark profile. That's going to be everything you do that they can then say, no, you talked with Michael McKibben. He's got a low social credit score, so you can't get any money today. The next one is FedWire. It's a security service. As we know, the security for this system is being provided by Tessert, who already has demonstrated that they can't secure anything and that they had money stolen. And let's remember that cryptocurrency, especially through the exchanges, have lost, last I counted, was between $5 to $10 billion. So when you start dealing with digits, money, supposed money, fake money, digit money, disappears. That's what this means. It also means that FedWire will be able to wire all of this information to the Bank for International Settlements. So any time that you want to spend money, you're going to have to go through a clearinghouse. That clearinghouse is the Bank for International Settlements, which is the most corrupt bank on the face of the earth. It controls all clearances for
Is this
all
the one?
expenditures from all central banks in all countries.
Is this the bank that's controlled by Jabba the Hutt?
Yes, that guy who looks like St. Augustine. He has to cut a hole in the table just to get up to it to eat. Yeah, that's what we're dealing with. And whoever runs the Bank for International Settlement is just always a horrible scumbag. They're all Pilgrim Society members. They're all British oriented. And when it comes down to it, track most of this stuff back. It comes back to what we've been pointing out. The British Pilgrim Society, which are really Rodnite Babylonian bankers. So another thing they have is Fed Funds Service. Oh, this is a good one. Wait till you hear about this one. Recently, when our demented president, the fake Biden, said that he came out and said every single penny of every account in the Silicon Valley Bank is covered. Don't you worry, every depositor will be covered. And then they said, well, how will you do that? And he says, oh, that's easy. I'm going to use a thing called a bank term funding facility. Never once explained that that is directly from the US Federal Reserve. So the bailout, which supposedly happened, which by the way, did not happen. I'll explain that in a second. But this line of credit for a year is giving it to anybody that the Fed determines gets the money. Janet Yellen has already told us the truth. There will only be 5 banks standing. Bank of America, the one with the patent that is fraudulent that you just described, is one of those banks. JP Morgan is one of the banks. Wells Fargo is one of the banks. Citibank and one other. But the point is, there's only going to be 5 banks left, and they will be controlled by the 12 central banks that then answer to the U.S. Federal Reserve. In other words, this Fed line, which is now going to be called Fed Now, and you can look this up. You can go to fednowexplorer.org, and you can read all about it. And when you read it, you're going to go, oh, this is a great international, globalist, transnationalist bank that will have ultimate control of everything. I better get on board. The only people who got on board were ordered to get on board by the executive order that we have exposed the second that it was signed by Biden. And so when Biden says that it's covered, no, it's not. That is.
And by the way, we have to remind ourselves executive orders do not apply to us. They only apply to the executive branch employees. We got to keep remembering that. These aren't laws that we have to follow.
Precisely. And by the way, Congress has already pointed out to Biden that what he did is illegal and he can't do it. He can't claw back and have discriminatory actions for bankers who were basically frauds. They were negligent. They were misrepresenting everything. And so he says he's going to go after those people. Let's remember, corporations, all that happens, that corporation could be responsible for a war that kills millions or pharmaceutical drugs that kill millions. And all they do is fire the CEO and no one ever goes to jail. Corporations are not prosecuted in America. And the US Federal Reserve is a corporation, but now it's going to be the most powerful corporation on the face of the earth. So another service they have is called Fed Funds Service. That means they do anything that a bank, asset management, any economic group that looks like a bank or handles money, they will have all those services. And they have also another branch of it. There's many branches of it. Fed National Settlement Service. That's what I'm talking about. That's who's going to determine whether when you want to spend money, it is cleared through the Fed National Settlement Service.
Douglas, can I comment on one thing you said just a minute ago? Mm-hmm. You said corporations are exempt from lawsuits. No, you didn't say that. You said
prosecutions and
prosecution. Okay, that may be true, may not be true, but what is certainly true is that any director or officer in any of those corporations is always liable for fraud, as are judges. And so therefore we have remedies should we have a justice system that cares to follow them.
That's right. And now there's also, you can go to Fedline website, their website, and you can look this up. You don't have to believe us. We've already shown you the website of Fed Now, which they say will come online soon. Matter of fact, it's supposed to come online as early as April the 1st, because all 56 federal agencies were ordered to have, what do you call it? When they can interchange their economic system now with the new economic system. And they had a fancy legal name for that. But they were ordered to do that, and they've all reported back that they're all ready to go. And now we find out. How were they ready to go? Because 2 years ago in 2021, Fedline Network opened, and they've all been using it since. Did anybody get told that? Did anybody tell you that this was happening and that they can basically charge you anything that they want because they're a bank and these are services? They're not going to tell you that yet. So with Silicon Valley Bank, they first told us, oh, don't worry. Biden created overnight, over a weekend, bank term funding facility through the U.S. Federal Reserve, through one of these systems, probably Fedline. Okay.
Reminds me of the Patriot Act within weeks after 9/11.
As you know, you can't set up one of these things overnight. And then what we didn't know is the following. On the Wednesday before the bank collapsed on Friday, $187 billion was drawn out of banks. Oh, did anybody know that? Has that been reported? Who took out the money? Same people who took out $42 billion from Silicon Valley Bank, all of the largest investors. Well, guess what? Guess who the number one investor in Silicon Valley Bank startups is? China. China has a 50-50 deal with new startups, and that includes some of the ones that we know very well, some of the biggest social media groups who are, in fact, going bankrupt. And we pointed out years ago that this would happen after the owners of the fake owners and cardboard cutouts like Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg did what? He pulled all of his money out, right? He pulled all this personal money out, and then he headed in the direction of Meta, which everyone knew was going to be a disaster, to bankrupt it. Because when these things are bankrupted and when they go to zero, then Biden and other evil politicians, and I consider every politician in Washington, D.C. to be corrupted at this point, because they vote for these things which take away our sovereign rights given to us by the Constitution. But what really happened? Well, stupid Janet Yellen, the head of our U.S. Treasury, who is a complete idiot, stated the truth accidentally, just like Biden spills the beans every time he opens his mouth. He lets the cat out of the bag. So what did Yellen say? There will only be 5 banks standing. And we know those banks are the banks that we've just mentioned, and they are covered. Look at their losses on the stock market exchange now. Banks are ranging in stock market crash from 75% of their assets, which are, well, not even their assets. They don't have assets anymore, but their stock market value, 75% down in some banks, 50%, 60%, 25%. Commonly, most banks are now at some 20% loss on the stock market, except for the 5 banks that are going to be the big ones. Isn't that amazing? So the rich people didn't pull their money out of the banks that are going to be the only secure banks, which will be ran by the U.S. Federal Reserve. They knew ahead of time. So this is a setup. And then what happened with Silicon Valley Bank? After they diffused it by, first off, not mentioning that $42 billion on a bank run before the Friday they crashed were they only paid out to companies that were large Silicon Valley companies, right? Then what do we find out? Oh, they didn't go bankrupt. They went into FDIC management and they created Silicon Valley Bridge Bank. Same thing with Signature. They created Signature Bridge Bank. And same thing with First Republic. They created First Republic Bridge Bank. That means the FDIC came in, took over, tried to sell their debt, really. They'll call it assets. There's no assets left in those companies, in those banks. But they sold what their supposed assets were, or really the credit, the debt they have. They tried to sell it to other banks, just as HSBC came in and offered $1 billion for Credit Suisse. And now it's 3.25.
When can I talk about Credit Suisse?
Let's talk about them once I finish this one statement, which is Silicon Valley Bridge Bank is not paying out anybody who has small deposits because they've gone into Chapter 11. Isn't that the opposite of what Biden told us? Didn't he tell us everybody would get their money back? Didn't he tell us he created over the weekend the bank term funding facility? So it's all lies, folks. This is a plan.
Gaslighter in chief, bro.
Gaslighter in chief, or what do they call it? Government by journalism, government by propaganda. So
Right.
basically, everything they have told you so far is a big fat lie.
Totally.
They've had this in place for 2 years, and it is going to be the reset of billionaires who are part of the World Economic Forum. It's not going to be a reset for us, but it will be probably a reset for the US dollar, and the US dollar will no longer exist. It will go into a cryptocurrency, which will be controlled by the Bank for International Settlements. Yes, tell us about Credit Suisse and their fraud.
Well, that was the third bank that they announced would go down. Credit Suisse is in Switzerland. Credit Suisse, and we know from our research that Credit Suisse was founded by Alfred Escher in the mid 1800s, and we know that Alfred Escher was also had an engineering company that Klaus Schwab's father was an engineer in Nazi Germany and that particular company won a Nazi award for being such an exceptional engineering company, and we now know that that engineering company was involved in the nuclear program in not only Germany during the war, but also Switzerland, South Africa, and now we've discovered from government documents the American Department of Energy was teamed up with the Escher Weiss company and was doing nuclear testing down in South Africa from Klaus Schwab's father's company. And Klaus also grew up into that company. So that's Credit Suisse, the evil empire that is Credit Suisse. And of course, they've been a prominent bank for the last 150 years. Now we see that Credit Suisse magically last week went belly up and was purchased lock, stock, and barrel by UBS AG, which is another Swiss bank. And if anybody believes that Credit Suisse really went bankrupt, they're smoking something. Because what we see now is that UBS, well-known company, they purchased Credit Suisse, and we just looked up the large stakeholder capital groups that control UBS. The top company is Chase Nominee Limited in London. Second one is DTC, Seed and Company, New York. And the third is Nortrust Nominee Limited, London. So here we go again, Douglas, these shell companies, it's obvious. And so we looked up Chase Nominees Limited. And both Chase Nominees Limited and Nortrust Nominees Limited are registered on the London Stock Exchange, and there is no information that they've had any capitalization that would be capable of purchasing Credit Suisse. That's the first telltale sign. This is another shell game, and it truly is a shell game, because we look at Chase Nominees Limited, and its ultimate owner is none other than JP Morgan Chase. And then we look up Nortrust Nominees Limited in London, and that's none other than, let me get this right, the Northern Trust Company USA. And that's all judicially recognizable evidence. So we have these two shell companies that somehow had the magical capital to purchase the assets of Credit Suisse. And then the third one is Seedy and Company, which we have covered during our investigation of Michael Farmer. And this is not a bank. This is a clearinghouse for stock trades on the New York stock market. So this is the ultimate insider. How can an ultimate insider who knows what stocks are being exchanged and actually holds the stock while the trade is occurring on the New York Stock Exchange, how can they, with all the knowledge of all transactions in the United States, all of a sudden become a bank and have a 7.12 holding in UBS AG. I mean, the corruption here is they're not even hiding this anymore.
Correct.
So we've got the controllers of UBS Capital are ostensibly American, but are in fact all City of London companies. And one of those is the seeding company that handles all of the transactions on the New York Stock Exchange. So you're right, we have sold out our sovereignty to the City of London.
And Michael Farmer, for a while, was in charge of International Continental Exchange, which owns the New York Stock Exchange.
Correct.
And I should explain that the US government, when they opened the New York Stock Exchange, said, well, we can't let this company, which really it is a corporation, go bankrupt. So they created the one and only company in America that cannot go bankrupt. So when you put your money in your 401k and it goes on the stock market, you give it up for investment purposes to seed and company. And the DTCC, the Depositors Trust Clearing Corporation, clears every single purchase or sale on the New York Stock Exchange. But while your money is invested in the New York Stock Exchange, you don't own it. Seed and company owns it. And if they go belly up for whatever reason, they hold all the assets. Now, that means also all the assets on MERS, because once ICE a couple of years ago bought MERS, the mortgage exchange, the mortgage exchange registry system. In other words, every single deed, every house in America is in the MERS computer, and MERS is now on the stock market. And I only just figured this out yesterday. It's shocking what I'm about to tell you. I've told people many times that the US Federal Reserve has 12 central banks. Those central banks bought up, well, they used 1/3 of their assets to buy stock on the New York Stock Exchange. They used 1/3 of their assets to buy the badly assessed bundled mortgages that caused the 2008 crash. During the 2008 crash, only 1/3 of those mortgages came forth and it crashed our system. There's still 2/3 being held by the central banks. I didn't know this until 2 days ago when I figured out that they created a thing called mortgage bonds. So when you get overnight repos on a bank, which demonstrates that you don't have enough money in that bank, you're actually bankrupt because of Babylonian Radonite fractional banking laws, which are simply Ponzi schemes. The bank doesn't keep your money. You agree, just like when you go on the stock market, you're giving your money over to them to invest. If they lose their investments, you lose all your money. Not only that, but with the banks, if the derivatives go bust, and there's $150 trillion worth of derivatives being exchanged if you bundle them all up together. Who controls derivative betting? The Bank for International Settlement. And they have rigged it many times when Deutsche Bank twice was going to go bankrupt, but they held the derivative betting for the weekend, came up with some magical assets to make sure that Deutsche Bank didn't fail. Well, Deutsche Bank is bankrupt. They've been bankrupt for years. Most of our banks are bankrupt. As a matter of fact, the statement right now from the US Treasury is that regional banks have lost 50% of their stock market value. Is anybody mentioning that? No. So this is a long planned, rigged, fake system that is coming to its end. And as at the end, of course, people go completely nuts. The people who are greedy, the ones who are demon possessed by mammon, greed, have planned all of this, and they don't care about the rest of us. But I believe they have not planned it well enough. And so what we're going to see here is that those mortgage bonds, let me explain overnight repos. 2.5 years ago, when the banks actually started failing miserably because of fractional banking. Fractional banking means they don't have to keep any of your money. You give them money, they can invest it 100%. Zero assets they have. It's all invested. What are they invested in? Bonds, usually US Treasury bonds. But now I found out that they're investing them in mortgage bonds, which I didn't even know existed. I have to figure out exactly when that happened. It can't be long because I've never even heard of it before. But you've heard of this. You saw it on the news every night that the US Federal Reserve had to loan money to the banks because they didn't have money to give people when they came to the bank to get their money out. And this happens every day. And now we can see that it's happening to at least 50% of the banks. So what were they doing? They were giving these overnight repos, $3.5 trillion. Right now, it's $3.5 trillion every night because they've rolled over the debt. So a bank says, okay, I have this money in US Treasury bonds and in mortgage bonds, but I don't have any money to give people when they come to the bank. So US Federal Reserve, will you help us? They didn't ask the Treasury. They asked the US Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve said, yes, we'll just give you made up fiat currency or digital money, and it will cover you. But what it is it's an advance on the maturity of the bonds. Now, this is complicated, so you got to really think about this because it's such a scam. But remember, this is a 4,000-year-old rotten-eyed Babylonian banker scam, okay? So they say, oh, what we're going to do is you brought treasury notes that don't mature for 30 years, and you're getting 8% on that. Well, at first, we'll give you the 8% up front and we'll make them mature, but it's going to be a loan. Well, that keeps rolling over every single night. So the list of 3.5 trillion is probably much, much more. Those are just the rollovers. So what was happening is also those bad mortgages that are held by the central banks, 1/3 of their entire assets are in bad mortgages. They bought them up in 2008, or we would have had the total collapse in 2008. So they are selling these as bonds. First off, they're fraudulent bonds because they're all improperly assessed. They were assessed at AAA. They're actually triple D. They're worthless. So if you buy a bond on a worthless bundled mortgage and it's going to reach a maturity rate, then there's no money there. So when the Fed gives out this money, it's simply digital money. It's not even fiat currency anymore. It goes to the bank overnight so that the next day they'll have some supposed money, cash, fiat currency, fake fiat currency, inflated fiat currency that then they can give to people when they come to the banks. But the second there's a bank run, they'll all collapse. We saw the bank run on Wednesday, $42 million at Silicon Valley Bank. And by the weekend, it was, of course, bankrupt. It was actually bankrupt before. That 42,000 was probably in repos. And the repos, the overnight repos, are given on mortgages, which are bad bundled mortgages. So we are talking about the largest economic scam in human history, and it's just rolling by everybody as if everything's going to be okay. And they're magically creating the bank term funding facility over the weekend. And now they're creating the Fed Now, and they're trying to convince people the Fed Now, this new bank that's going to control everything. It will basically, remember, the US dollar controls all international currency exchange. Well, it's going to die. It's going to go to a US Treasury digital currency. And they expect that to take the place. But who is going to do the clearing for that? The Bank for International Settlements, because this is all central bank money. And our central bank is the US Federal Reserve. So the overnight repos proved to me 2.5 years ago when they started, these banks are all bankrupt because of fractional banking. They actually reduced it from 10% to 0. Now they're in negative numbers. So banks don't have any money. It's
Reduced
given
what?
to them.
Reduced what?
Their fractional banking amount. They don't have to have any money to back up your deposit. Fractional banking went to 0. And now, remember when they were talking about even interest rates going into negative numbers? That's the same thing, but they couldn't sell that. They couldn't sell that story, so they went with this story. So the Fed has basically bought the banks. Why? Because they have no assets. They loaned them money, which is illegal. You can't take a bond and give a maturity payment off of it unless it is approved. But remember, the US Federal Reserve doesn't have to follow any American laws because they are a corporation and they're independent And the only thing we do is every 5 years, we reinstate them, we re-ratify their existence, and we usually give them between 80 to $100 billion for doing what they do. And what do? They do nothing. They do nothing. They make up fake information.
Some of this we're talking is theory, because it operates on a couple of faulty assumptions in my view. And one of them is this digital passport, this digital ID, or this Fed Now money, presumes that this digital system is always going to be turned on. Now, I give you one local example. I went into Target last weekend. I was looking for a sweeper. Walked in and the place was just, there was havoc everywhere. And I said, what happened? And they said a thunderstorm went through and we lost power. And that was like 2 hours ago. So they had all these people that wanted to buy stuff and couldn't even process their payments. And so everybody was just milling around. All the employees were milling around. And so I was talking with the security guy and I said, how do you maintain security during a situation like this? And he said, I can't. And then I said, well, look, I want to buy this sweeper. Can you help me out here? And I said, I have cash. You can take cash. Oh, we can't take cash. I said, why not? Because the cash registers don't work. So they could not take credit cards. They could not take cash. And there's a bunch of kids in their 20s, early 30s probably. And they're like people with no thumbs. They didn't know what to do. And I thought, wow, this is just one small example. Now, can you imagine a global system where it's always on and it's always going to be there to handle your transactions? I don't think that's ever going to work. And if you ask anybody in technology, they'll tell you, no, that will never work, because there are just too many moving parts. There's too many gears and pulleys, and it all has to be tested all the time. And once you have a system in place, if you've invented something like I have, you're really loath to make a change once you get it working and you get it debugged. And that takes a long time. And so therefore, now you're saying, okay, we're going to expand this to the nth degree with computers all over the world, and you're going to have this blockchain profile that can be distributed anywhere you are, and it's always going to have the right data when you need it. No, this system is never going to work, ever.
I agree, and Americans will not accept it, just like we didn't accept the vaccine pass. But guess what? It was already put in your new phone. So every phone that's 2 years old already has it there. It just hasn't been activated. They don't
Well,
stop.
fine, but it's still not going to work because there's just too many versions. Every time a change occurs in any one of these systems, it has to be tested. And after a while, you stumble on your own shoelaces trying to keep any particular app on this phone working all the time. I mean, look at an older app, won't even work. So you're constantly updating, and now you can't even get anybody on tech support anywhere in the world. You're always having to go through these email systems, and they say they're going to call you back, and they don't. So no, this ain't going to work.
This is fake science.
Yes.
It is what they call
belief in science.
Settled science, which is belief in science as a god. Now, it used to be when I was still working some years ago, I'd ask people, we were a high tech company. We had, my boss worked with Apple as a developer. He made jillions of dollars off of developing the pull down menus for the Mac 1 and 2. And so I would ask him, we'd have all this stuff. We were at a school. I had 250 employees, 24 schools. And I'd say, what percent does the technology work? And people would say about 10%.
That's about right.
Okay.
He's being honest.
And then think of this. When there's a tech problem, what happens? Everything stops and everybody bows down and prays and hopes the tech guy can solve it. The tech guy will tell you it can't be solved, of course.
No, it's somebody else's problem.
And there are now churches opened that worship super AI, super artificial intelligence, machine intelligence. What happens when the Bank for International Settlement goes down and gives no clearance for anybody in the whole world to spend any money because how many of the banks?
I know what I'll do. I'll get out my constitutional small denomination dimes and quarters, because at the end, that's real money. It's in
Yeah.
our hands and it's constitutional.
That's right.
Now, just the other day, Yellen said that the dollar used to be worth, a penny per dollar. Now it's a penny for $2. We're in debt. Every dollar that goes out is actually puts us more into debt. And that's why the inflation is going crazy. And Jerome Powell, he's getting ready to raise the Fed rate again. The Fed was created to manipulate our economic system above the US federal treasury. Okay. And that's the way it's been. And so you hear lies and lies and lies. For instance, you hear that Biden has only dropped to 46% approval. Hello, maybe 4.6 approval, but these are lies. And where do they come from? They
Right.
come from federal agencies and corporations flying a false flag as a federal agency called the US Federal Reserve. Those numbers you hear from the Treasury are all lies. And
That's
all you have to do
another
is pay
example.
attention.
That's another example why their technical system won't work, because you cannot build a working system on lies. Sooner or later, somebody's got to tell the truth, and then that person takes that knowledge and they move forward. And that's why debugging is so hard, because all you need is one lying programmer in your cascade of 20 programmers, and they wreak havoc. And now you multiply this by hundreds of thousands of programmers working on this system. No way it's ever going to work.
And let's look at what tech does. What's the largest tech problem in human history? Not problem, but program. That would be CERN. CERN doesn't exist. We've proven that. That was a fraud. That was the theft of international funds from every country that could donate to it. And what does it have? It will give you a readout, a digital readout of supposedly what they discovered by smashing things together at high speeds. CERN doesn't exist. There's two other colliders there that do exist. Where is CERN? It's in Switzerland. Where is the Bank for International Settlement? It's in Switzerland. Why did the Bank for International Settlement come? Because it was the way to deal with war debt. Not only that, it was the place that the gold that the Germans had stolen from particularly France and Spain, but also all countries that they conquered, went to Switzerland to a bank. You can't trust anything Swiss. You'd have to be insane to trust somebody that declares neutrality in two world wars that they helped start because they're the bankers behind it. So what did they do with that gold from the Germans and from Yamashita gold from the Japanese? They're still sitting on it.
Right.
And what are they going to do? They're eventually going to say, oh, digital currency can only be supported by gold-backed assets so that they can actually say that it means something. Right now, it will mean nothing. And if they can switch over to basically controlling all world currencies through central banks and through the Bank for International Settlement as their settlement group, as the group that is their clearinghouse, folks, it can't get any more corrupt than that. It can't get to be a bigger lie than that. And basically, when they want to, if they wish to, they could bring the gold out of the Zurich gold bullion vault, which is at the end of the airport in Zurich, which was created when the SEC stopped Swiss numbered accounts, which is where all the big criminal money and all the big billionaires kept their money for a long time, that and offshore accounts. They closed that down. So now they moved it to gold bullion. So what do you see? You see every central bank in every single country buying all the gold they can. That should be a warning to you. And the five big banks that the Treasury says will survive hold the largest holdings of American minted silver and gold coins. And that would be JP Morgan, or the ones I've mentioned. And what are they going to do? They will reset the value of all currencies, which will be digital currencies, because literally, I don't know a country except the ones that are our enemies, Russia, China, and a few others, Syria, and a few others, that haven't gone over to a central bank digital currency. They've in England, it's already set up, and they have linked it to vaccinations. They've linked it to whether you're staying in your little tiny district they don't want you to move out of. And if you violate any of that, it's going to be just like China, where they interviewed someone when the social credit system was started there, which was named Dragonfly by Eric Schmidt, which is also already in place here. What did that Chinese man say? If you don't comply and you get a bad social credit score, you can't take a single step. And now they're literally making that true. You won't be able to buy food. And then who takes over? Who's been taking over the housing market, rental market, used cars? BlackRock, Vanguard, T. Rowe
Well, I
Price,
I
State
hear,
Street.
I've heard that assertion about China, but I go back to the issue of technology. There is no way that that system works across the board. No way.
It's a targeting system. So
Right.
it's just like what they told us. Oh, how many times did the intelligence community say we do not spy on Americans? And then when the truth came out, it was no. What is called? There's names for it: total information awareness, the sentient world. What's it called? The something SWS. The point is that they control all of this. They already have controlled it, but and they said we don't spy on any Americans, never. And then they said, well, actually, we spy on all Americans. We store it at NSA, and then if we target you, we can go back and grab it. But essentially, we don't spy on you because we didn't target you. But if we target you, yes, we admit we do. And what can they do to you? Close down everything that is electronic that has any connection to you. And if
Right.
you don't understand this, look at what happened in Iceland. Look at what happened in Cyprus. Look at what happened in Greece. They had to literally go into the people's bank accounts, take money out, bail-ins from their depositors. This has happened again and again. And then if you want to see where this is headed, look at Venezuela. Venezuela had such inflation that they started printing notes that were $10,000 notes and $100,000 notes. And then in the end, they threw them out the window as toilet paper because a $100,000 note wouldn't buy you a speck of bread. That's where we're headed if they have their way, because this is an attempt by 2030 to pull all assets into centralized corporations that cannot be, well, they can be prosecuted, but what happens? They might get a fine. They might slap the hand of the CEO and he moves to another company and does it again. And we know this because Silicon Valley Bank, their security division was run by a vice president of Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers caused the crash in 2008. Oh, isn't it funny that the same man has gone over to Silicon Valley Bank and has caused this lack of confidence and the domino effect on bank runs? And so when they tell you, when Biden tells you, when Yellen tells you, when Powell tells you anything, it's a lie, folks.
Combo, I asked Mike today if he would take a moment and if he would say a prayer that he no longer finds it acceptable that this demon is riding on his stolen technology, his creativity that came from within him, made in the image of God, and to tell that demon he's no longer allowed to ride that. Michael, did you do that for us?
I did.